I sent out for this was entitled "The Man Who Changed My Life." That's him. that one there. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kirstie, founder of Pink's Boutique Skincare and Proverb Skincare. Some of you know me from different places. So if you've met Pink's Boutique, the other brand is Proverb, and vice versa. And I've spent the last 17 years knee deep in organic skincare, researching toxic load, toxic ingredients. And it is ultimately because of the man you're going to meet in a minute, Phil Richards. I just want to introduce Abby briefly as well. So Abby was one of my original Pink's Boutique salons. So she was a therapist to begin with, but she can tell you a little bit about herself now.
Good evening, everyone. It's awesome to have you here. Thank you for joining us. We've got one more person. If you could just check you're on mute, please, that'd be awesome. And like Kirstie said, I met her many moons ago when I branched out into the organic world, and I've travelled through being a beauty therapist, a masseuse. So I've travelled and lived in Thailand, India, studying all of these amazing therapies, and I've landed at kinesiology and movement, and I'm now studying with Phil, and he is completely blowing my mind away. And that is why we sit before you this evening to discuss this thing called inflammation, because Kirstie and I, you know, I don't think many people understand what it truly is. And as Phil is going to explain, there's so much more to it. It's just absolutely huge. So with that, we're going to pass the floor over to Phil. Phil, welcome, and please introduce yourself and the wonderful wisdom that you behold.
You're too flattering, man. Well, you know, as I was, in terms of inflammation, first of all, there are many causes. There's not a singular cause, you know. So, for example, you know, I kind of study blood work and stool work, and in those, you know, in the area that I study, you can see certain markers, which we'll speak about shortly, on what can cause inflammation. So, for example, we know that certain pesticides, toxins, etc., will cause inflammation in the body. So things that you can't see, you know, the toxic load is quite significant. I've written about it and on it quite significantly. And the reason why they cause inflammation is that they interfere with the way the hormonal system functions and the immune system functions. So a lot of the toxins coming into the body via the food that we consume, the cosmetics that a lot of people use. So, for example, the typical client who's not using, you know, what Kirstie and Luke have developed will put on around 6 pounds of cosmetics onto their skin every year. And a lot of those cosmetics are very endocrine disrupting, and the endocrine system, which is the hormonal system, interacts with the immune system. There's a correlation there. So when these toxins are coming into the body, the immune system will tag them and also consider them as what they are, as a foreign body. So you can get an inflammatory storm through that way, which is quite common. The pesticides, I can tell you now, you know, which are obviously not just, people just think of pesticides just on fruit and vegetables, but the actual highest pesticide load is actually in meat, because what they feed the animals, they don't really, you know, you can't imagine them feeding the animal organic grain, put it that way, okay? You know, so even though the meat sometimes could say organic, it's normally very pesticide laden. The drinking water is the tap water is highly contaminated. So we get in, and also a lot of the toxic cookware, things like non-stick frying pans. So the point I'm making is there's an accumulation of toxins coming in, and what they do, they interfere with the way, as I said, the immune system functions and the endocrine, and it creates an inflammatory cascade. But another root of the inflammation, which is a real big one, which I test for, is the imbalance between the omega-6 fatty acids and the omega-3 fatty acids. And, you know, when I look at the blood work, I see on average around, you know, in the UK, you're going to see like 25 times higher amounts of omega-6, which is a pro-inflammatory fat, and I'll explain how it works briefly in a second, compared to one omega-3 fatty acid. Now, both those fatty acids are essential, but the problem is, from an evolutionary perspective, we evolved in a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 omega-6s, 1 omega-3s, and it keeps the inflammatory balance in base. Now, what a lot of people won't understand, even a lot of doctors won't have heard of this word, But the reason why the omega-3, omega-6s are so important, they probably actually do drive the majority of inflammation on a cellular level. So without making this such a complex subject, there's something, the oldest hormones known to humanity are called icosanoids. And actually a friend of mine wrote a book on icosanoids. So you can imagine how interesting that conversation is. And, you know, so they are the oldest known hormones. They actually reside in the cell membranes. And the omega-6 will stimulate pro-inflammatory icosanoids, and omega-3s will stimulate anti-inflammatory icosanoids. So the problem that we got again is that we have a society full of toxic loaded people with chronically imbalanced omega-6, omega-3 ratios just to get things slightly going. So already you won't feel a lot of these inflammatory mechanisms going on because it's like a smoldering fire underneath the body. Eventually, you know, when it becomes chronic, you'll know about it. It's been going on for years. And the biggest source of inflammation, I have to say, is coming through the gastrointestinal wall. And, you know, I test, and I've, you know, unfortunately, I've studied that quite in depth as well. But there's a marker, for example, when you look at the stool sample called zonulin, which was only discovered in the year 2000. And zonulin is linked to every single autoimmune disorder. And what zonulin does, and I'll tell you what stimulates it in a second, it opens up the intestinal wall. And what happens then, there are substances that will come into the bloodstream which shouldn't be in there. And that also then causes an inflammatory response. And as I said, this particular molecule is linked to every single autoimmune disorder. And the primary trigger of it is gluten. So every single human being who consumes gluten, for at least 5 hours, the zonulin will be stimulated and it'll open up the barrier wall. Then you're going to have substances, as I said, coming in there, which shouldn't be in the bloodstream. And then the immune system then will start attacking. And this is one of the biggest causes, especially of things like Hashimoto's, which is very common. Now, the other thing that we've now discovered that will stimulate zonulin, which is a real shocker, to be honest with you, is the glyphosate in Roundup. So, and what we've now realized, and in the UK, for example, it is one of the most used pesticides, and the foods which will contain the highest amounts are definitely breakfast cereals, which are already inflammatory in themselves because of the wheat content. They're very high in glyphosate, and they've actually discovered that glyphosate will increase zonulin 10 times higher than what gluten will. So before you know it, you can't see these substances, you know, and you're creating this inflammatory response in the body. And then the third thing that will also stimulate the intestinal wall to become leaky is what is known as dysbiosis in the bowel, where you've got an imbalance between good and bad bacteria. That's why I look at bowel health, because a lot of people's issues, and you know, not just inflammation, but the vast majority of diseases are manifesting via the gastrointestinal tract. You know, as Hippocrates says, all disease comes through the gut. Not necessarily all diseases, but most diseases certainly do. So, and then when you look then at hormones, and this is a real big one, you know, in women, for example, women with low estrogen, which I see in literally 98% of the women I test, are going to have chronic inflammation. And as a side note as well, will have chronic insulin resistance, which also drives inflammation, much more likely to become osteoporosis, you know, osteoarthritis, etc. And also what we now discovering as well, which is quite interesting on the current COVID-19 scam, is that women with the lowest progesterone were, and also with the lowest estrogen, by the way, were much more likely to have severe COVID or die of COVID. And actually on the men's side of it, it was actually testosterone. Men with the lowest testosterone. There are other factors involved as well, but from a hormone perspective, what they discovered with progesterone, for example, the higher the progesterone is, it actually, the biggest thing with COVID is something called a cytokine storm. You'll hear that being thrown around quite a bit. That's what kills the patients. And what it means is cytokines are simply the immune system's communication methods. Okay, so the endocrine will communicate with each other with hormones. The nervous system will communicate with neurotransmitters, and the immune system with cytokines. Now, as the immune system is fighting, for example, COVID-19, it releases these cytokines, also trying to increase the ability to kill the virus. In the meantime, the problem with the cytokines, especially if you've got nutrient deficiencies and you've got hormonal deficiencies, the cytokines cause massive inflammation. Okay, so this is another reason why so many people are dropping, not just with COVID. 1 in 2 people in the UK will be diagnosed with cancer who were born after 1960. And the relevance why I say 1960, which is interesting, because the 1940s crew, you know, who were born in that era, they weren't subjected to the amount of pesticides and vaccinations as the 1960 crew. You know, each generation is becoming much, much more malnourished, much more toxic, much more inflamed, you know, so it's all happening. So we've created really an environment where disease is just going to flourish. So, you know, if I can give you some hope, you know, what I discovered when I wrote my last book were that there's 3 primary causes, no matter whether it's an inflammatory disease or whether it's obesity, whether cancer, there's only 3 primary causes, and there's one more which I'll add on, but you can't have the 4th one without having the 3. So make a note of this, okay? Because I think this is what I'm going to tell you now is not out there, but if you understand it, disease is not bad luck. Disease is a manifestation of taking a hold in the right environment. Okay, if the environment is full of toxins, if it's full of nutrient deficiencies and inflammation and chronic stress, disease will always flourish, okay? So the 3...
Is this my goldfish in a bowl, Phil?
Yeah, it's the goldfish.
Is this my goldfish?
Yeah, pretty much, you know, and, you know, and that was one of the best analogies I was taught over.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I would explain that. And I also wanted to kind of explain how we got involved in terms of rugby, because this is exactly what you did with the boys at that point. So in the early 2000s, I think, Phil turned up at Harlequins RFC where Luke was playing and basically stood in front of them and said, "You are goldfish in a bowl. And what is around you is going to impact everything about your health and performance." So when we first met Phil, everything that he was learning and teaching us was about health, strength, and performance. And you still do that, don't you? So who are you still involved with at the moment?
Well, you know, a typical day for me will be working with, you know, from stage 4 cancer patients to preparing Eddie Hall, you know, for the Thor fight. So I prepared Ed all the way up to the 2017 World's Strongest Man. And I've prepared him since, really, you know, because we didn't think the fight was going to be so long. So, you know, so yeah, still with, you know, with some high-end athletes, but the majority of my work now, thankfully, is with people who are just trying to reclaim their health. But it's good to keep, you know, I do like, you know, the working with an high-end athlete is like working with a cancer patient. Everything has to be absolutely bang on the money, you know, but I'll give you a great example on inflammation and on the people I work with. You know, there was a 35-year-old man yesterday, you know, who had kidney cancer last year. And when you look at the blood work, you know, they said we've removed the cancer. They hadn't. The cancer was still there. It was rampant, you know, but it's back to the goldfish environment, because what they can do, they can remove the cancer, the actual tumor or whatever, but they haven't changed the environment of the goldfish bowl, okay? The environment, the cancer never goes, it's in us all. What determines whether the cancer manifests into a problem is whether we give it the right environment. And the right environment is the nutrient deficiencies, the toxic overload, and chronic multiple stresses. That will always drive. When I looked at his bloods, there's certain markers, you know, when you look at blood work. Insulin is a big one, for example. Insulin, when it's really high, will drive cancer. His levels were 1,800 times higher than they should be, okay? There's another marker when we talk about inflammation called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's one of the most accurate markers for chronic inflammation. Now, if this marker is over 3, you are something like 9 times more likely to die of a heart attack, okay? Your risk for all diseases go up exponentially. You really want it about 0.25. His was something, you know, his was 22. So the problem was,
I can't hear you.
You know, he's
Come
creating.
If you want to put them on mute.
Yeah, nothing else. You're killing me, nothing else. And, you know, so they've created, the environment, so it was still there for the cancer, all the inflammation, chronic inflammation. And there's a great marker on the bloods as well called GGT, okay, gamma glutamyltransferase. And so you can look at certain markers. Not only can you look at the inflammation state, but you can also look at the likelihood of this person surviving the cancer, or if it's somebody not with cancer, if they move in not just towards cancer, but towards all the diseases, okay? Because it could be heart disease in somebody, it can be dementia, it can be cancer, it can be chronic diabetes, etc. But the GGT marker will tell you how much antioxidants you're producing endogenously within yourself, okay? Now, the lower the antioxidant production, again, and if you're loaded with toxin, this guy had 6 mercury fillings and 2 root canals as well. So there was a huge toxic load coming in from the mouth, okay? And a lot of people don't realize that, that is where, when people say, disease starts in the gut, it also mainly starts in the mouth as well, especially in today's day and age. If you've got root canals and you've got mercury fillings, that is causing real silent, dangerous inflammation, and particularly in the brain and in the heart and the blood vessels.
Yeah, tell us about the teeth. This was something that happened to you, wasn't it? This is how you got involved with your kind of in-depth mercury and then aluminium research.
Yeah, well, 15 years ago, actually, when I just left Harlequins, I went to work with Amir Khan and Bolton Wanderers and stuff like that. And the reason why I'm saying this is, it was that time I really started to understand. I thought a lot of my health problems was actually then coming from my mouth. I had 7 mercury fillings. I had a root canal, which would have an abscess every day, which I'd have to burst, okay? But I didn't realize what had happened. I'd had that put in when I was 14 years of age. And I had a big back molar taken. So I was in a dentist chair for 7 hours, which was just ridiculous. They should never, you should only have 1 or 2 fillings removed at a time. You have a month off to detoxify, but the guy just did it all in one go. So I ended up having idiopathic cardiomyositis, which is chronic inflammation of the heart. I didn't realize I had that disorder. And that's when I started realizing and becoming much more well-read on mercury, on the dangers of mercury fillings, and also the dangers of root canals. If you've got either one or both together, I tell people, don't even worry about eating organic food and drinking clean filtered water. You're fucked, until you, and I can't even say it more politely, because when you understand the true devastation, it should be a crime against humanity without even being over the top to put root canals and mercury fillings in people's mouths. When you understand that the mercury comes to the dental office in a big yellow box, hazardous toxic waste, okay? Do not touch. And when they take it out of your mouth, it goes in the same frigging box. And if they don't get rid of that as toxic waste, there's a special, they'll get fined £10,000 straight off the bat,
Yeah, it's millimeters in your soft tissue away from blood vessels in your brain. And so I've heard Phil talk about this before. It is something, if it's something you wanted to have a look at, it's normally the first thing you tell people to do, isn't it, Phil, in terms of really all of this is about life longevity. So if we take the stance that most of us are upright today and okay, whatever okay looks like, then this really is about longevity and health. You obviously specialize in when things go really bad and there is genuine chronic disease as well. But I mean, your advice always with the teeth side in terms of a toxic load around you is to genuinely find a dentist who has an expertise in removing mercury fillings, and to do it carefully, one at a time, under their guidance. And it's something that I had never considered before as a potential. And I had 2 root canals in my mouth too. So yeah, on that list, because I know some of you are making notes, teeth was number 1. The other, I think, from your original stance is that importance of omega fish oils. And the one thing I talk about, and partly why we're here, is in skincare. The reason Abby and I joined together to do this program of inflammation up from now till Christmas is Abby deals with women who are suffering with menstrual cycles, perimenopause, menopause all the time. That is what she's doing. I'm dealing with people with skin flare-ups, eczema, psoriasis, irritation, reacting to products. And we spend our days actually not telling them to use our product, but telling them all the other things they need to do sleep, drink water, take these supplements, do this. And we were like, actually, this is the 360-degree healthcare that we're all involved and we're all about. And fish oil is always high on the list. And there is something people need to do in terms of looking at EPA and DPA totals, isn't there, on the pack? So we're always trying to get you these takeaways. So yes, you can go to a supermarket and buy a fish oil, but it's probably not going to be right. Phil, what does it need to have?
Well, there's a number of things. I developed a liquid fish oil about 9-10 years ago, with very high levels of EPA and DHA in there. But what I also discovered when I was manufacturing supplements is that fish oils become rancid very quickly. Okay, that's why if you have fresh salmon in the kitchen and you only got to leave it maybe for an hour and it absolutely stinks because it becomes oxidized. Now, what protects that from happening, actually, what we have discovered is vitamin D. So what I do, I incorporate vitamin D in with the fish oil, along with vitamin A, and I'll explain why vitamin A in a second, along with vitamin E, CoQ10, and vitamin K2. So basically, all those antioxidants not only have an incredible benefit for our health, but it protects the oil from going rancid. So if people are interested in that, they can go to like PRP supplements and get the ultimate fish oil liquid. If they take 1 teaspoon with each meal a day, within about 30 days, they'll get what is known as the red blood cell. So when I look at blood work, one of the most important markers is called the red blood cell index, okay? And in the UK, it's normally around 1.4%, which is just catastrophic. That's when you're going to get all the inflammation. And also, you can predict suicide on that marker. You can predict heart attack rate. So Harvard University, for example, they discovered if you were under 4% on that particular blood marker, compared to somebody that's, say, 7% and above, you are 90% more likely to die of your first heart attack, because it's an inflammatory response. Heart disease, all those diseases really, they're all based on inflammation. So you got to look on, like if you were buying a capsule, you're looking at least 360 milligrams of EPA and about 180 to 210 of DHA. You always know if it's a real poor fish oil, it'll have 180 EPA and it'll have 120 DHA. That's the bog standard sewage oil, because a lot of the fish oil is so badly processed. So the company that actually bought my company, I have to say, and not without giving them a plug, I'd say they produce the most highest pharmaceutical grade fish oil in the world. If you went to their plant, it is just quite incredible, so that's where we get our products made. So, and then going back to the psoriasis and things like that, the biggest driver of that is, because I've got a couple of psoriasis patients, is not just the omega-6, omega-3 basis, but I tell you, their problems will be coming through their gut, okay? It'll be the bowels, okay? And then you've got to know how to feed the bowels, but you've got to know, if you don't look under the hood, as I say, and look at, the health of the gastrointestinal tract, because on the stool sample, there's a marker there called calprotectin, and calprotectin will give you it's the most predictive marker for inflammation in the bowels. And then the other marker in the stool sample is called elastase, and that tells you how efficient the pancreas is at breaking down foods. So the point I'm going to make there is, if you've got high elastase, and also we test zonulin there as well, and you've got high zonulin, okay, which is leaky gut, and you've got very low pancreatic function, you're never going to solve psoriasis by omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids. The problem is it's in a different stream, it's much more upstream. You've really got to fix the gastrointestinal wall, and there's a whole lesson, as Abby will find in the course I'm doing, it's about a 5-hour lecture just on the gut,
And how, Phil? So, I mean, the number one kind of sounds like, and I know some of the people watching have, and it's on my Christmas list. This is what I want Santa to bring me, as my blood testing. But let's presume that most of us haven't had our blood tests and haven't had our blood read by you. And when we said the reading, like, it's not like a doctor taking your blood test and looking at it. Like, you are layers and layers and layers. I've seen some of the data kind of sheets of your patients, like unbelievable detail. But if we haven't done that, how would any of us even know that we have internal inflammation? Like, how would we know?
You really don't. That's the problem, unless it's something like the obvious, like rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, but as I said, it's like a smoldering fire, it doesn't really manifest. Like my mum, my late mum, she had chronic rheumatoid arthritis, but it only really manifested when it was always there, but when she was about 54, whatever, where her joints ended up coming in, you know, the feet, massive calluses on the hands, you know, but what, it was always there. It was smoldering, you know, and rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disorder, again, really coming through the gut. That's where rheumatoid, again, going back to the zonulin marker, you know, particles coming through, and obviously a poor diet as well, you know, which, and also stress, you know, stress will also drive the inflammation. And that's why I wanted to add this as well, because I said, when I wrote my last book and I discovered there are 3 primary drivers of all diseases, I said, whether it's an inflammatory disease or cancer. So I've mentioned it was nutrient deficiencies, it's toxic overload, it's chronic long-term stress. And the 4th one, which is quite surprising to many, but it's absolutely crucial, is actually a lack of strength and a lack of muscle. Okay, so we know those 2 factors in themselves are going to give you incredible longevity, but you can't gain strength and you can't gain muscle until you overcome the nutrient deficiencies, the toxic overload, and the chronic long-term stress. Because when you have those 3 factors, the body moves into fight or flight, okay? The body can't repair itself. It's another reason why a lot of inflammation will happen in that particular condition. The body will shut down the immune system, it will shut down the digestive system, it will shut down the reproductive system, and it also shuts down the frontal part of the brain. You know, so people who are in this situation, they're in this fight or flight, they from an emotional perspective, they speak before they think, because they work with their emotional brain, and that's how they live. And that's why disease will always catch those people, you know. And if you know this, it's just, you know, for me, when I've been studying in this field for over 35 years, and when I really discovered that, it was just like, wow, disease really, as I said, if you can offset what I see on the blood work, for example, and I'm not telling anyone to have blood, so I don't think I'm trying to sell you blood work, but what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing some of the worst nutrient deficiencies you can imagine. And the biggest ones are these. This is another reason why 1 in 2 people in the UK will get cancer born after 1960, and why COVID is crushing so many people, because the immune system has got it can't function without certain nutrients, okay? And if these nutrients are not in place, you can vaccinate the world. It ain't going to make any difference, because the immune cells cannot function without certain nutrients. And the big ones are vitamin C, okay? Vitamin C actually is the most powerful antiviral. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's an awesome drink. So in literally 100% of people, and the more toxins they have, the lower the vitamin C will be, okay? And I'll give you dosages if you want to ask that in a second on vitamin C, because it's quite an interesting. Magnesium is the most efficient nutrient in the UK. When you're low in magnesium, you'll have chronic inflammation. And also you'll end up eventually having massive issues with weight, okay? Because magnesium is crucial for insulin sensitivity. I'm seeing on average people with at least 500% lower magnesium levels than what they should have, okay? That's right across the board. And then you're looking at zinc. Zinc for male in particular and female, first of all, you can't make any stomach acid. When you can't make any stomach acid, you'll have a lot of putrefaction of food, especially protein. That then causes a lot of inflammation in the small intestine, which then goes into the large intestine, and you get this inflammatory cascade. And zinc is also essential for, it's one of the most important nutrients, undoubtedly, for the thymus gland, which makes the T cells, which then fights the viruses, fights the cancer cells. And then omega-3 in everyone, unless they've been schooled by me back in the day, they have got the worst deficiencies, you know. And vitamin D, as there's a double-edged sword of vitamin D, you know, I've been advocating vitamin D for over 20 years. The biggest problem with vitamin D, when you take it in high doses, is that you're going to end up with one of the worst magnesium deficiencies known to humanity. And that's why, you know, you have to take high dose magnesium with vitamin D. Vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. You know, you never want to be low with that. Vitamin D will not only massively reduce inflammation, but the T cells in the body which chase these viruses down, chase the cancer cells, 100% cannot function without vitamin D. So the nutrient deficiencies are just everywhere.
Yeah. So
Can I just interject for 1 second, because I'm getting a couple of messages. I'm getting a couple of messages from people going, "We're fucked." Listen, everyone, it's not. We have a way out. This is why Phil is here. Please don't be put off by life. But you know what Kirstie and I have experienced, and what I'm learning from Phil is that knowledge is power. And when you've got this knowledge, you can start to make changes, and they're very small changes to start with, but these are really easy things that you can do. Like Phil's saying, know your supplementation, know what your stressors are. I mean, what stresses you out? Yeah, these are the really important things, because that's going to, as Phil's been educating me, it's going to change your perspective. Your perspective on life is what creates your stressors. And once we can get underneath there, and once we can get through all of that emotional bullshit, excuse my language, then we can start
You're with Phil,
to
you can swear all you like.
we can start to make
I
create a clear
even
perspective.
email there'd be lots of swearing.
But one thing that I wanted to say though, Phil, is, and something that you've been speaking about recently on the course where I'm at, is that you've got to be healthy before you can be fit. And a lot of people will use exercise as a kind of, I'm angry, so I'm gonna go and exercise really hard, or I'm really pissed off, or they're not eating enough, or they're not eating the correct things. When really, this can again be driving you further away from your health than where you really want to be. And understanding that is so important in regards to cardiovascular health. Like Phil, you speak a lot about seeing these PTs taking in, not naive people, but they trust these PTs because they've got the qualifications, and they're doing them a disservice.
Well, I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with, in fact, it was this morning, one of the trainers in the local gym who had a menopausal woman on the treadmill. And fair play, he's actually doing the course. And she's been his client for the last 2 years. Trains 4 or 5 times a week under his tutelage, has just made no progress over the last 2 years. And the reason why is what you've just alluded to. Like, as I know, especially from looking at menopausal women's blood, for example, that what you see is not only just this huge, massive deficiency in all the hormones, but also these chronic nutrient deficiencies, this massive toxic overload. And then what happens then is exercise is stress, and you can't respond from stress when the body's already into this constant stress. And from a hormonal perspective, which you'll find out in lesson 13, I believe it is, what we know is, for example, with a menopausal woman with exceptionally low estrogen, they will not build any muscle tissue. Estrogen in the muscles themselves is something known as satellite cells. And in males, testosterone will drive these satellite cells to increase the size of the muscle. In female, it's estrogen. So in 95% of the women I look at, never mind if they're menopausal, by the way, but menopausal, yeah, there's a huge crash. But in women, and especially birth control pill as well, birth control pill will also cause a massive decline in estrogen and testosterone. And the reason why I'm saying that is that they can't respond. So not only have they got these nutrient deficiencies, they've got the toxic overloads, the 3 medications that will also crush any progress in terms of gaining lean muscle tissue, which are endemic in the UK, unfortunately, are statins, antidepressants, and birth control pill. And I should add the 4th, which is anti-inflammatories. Ibuprofen will shut down what are known as androgen receptors, which will respond only to things like testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, the hormones that build muscle. Well, the ibuprofen will actually sit on those receptors and it'll downregulate it. And what the birth control pill does, it increases something called sex hormone binding globulin by over 250%. And what that does, it encapsulates estrogen and especially testosterone, where they can no longer be used. And that can go on even for a year after you come off birth control pill. The SHBG, which I test for, can be off the charts. So again, this is why so many people drop out of exercise programs as well, because they train in really hard, but they can't get any response because the body is too stressed. As I said, the body's in the fight or flight response. The last thing the body's thinking is, well, I need a 6-pack, I need bigger guns. The body's just thinking, I just need to get through today, and that's what happens.
Phil, I've got just a couple of questions here. someone asked, what are your views on HRT? You've already mentioned that.
I'll give you a bit more on that now, because, you know, I've just finished a course on that. I'm doing two courses. I finished a master's on neurochemistry on the male and female hormones, but I'm doing another course with America's leading sort of gynecologist. HRT, I used to be 100% against. What I'll tell you on HRT, right, is use the estrogel, okay? And the only thing that you have to do then, right, this is why HRT is so problematic. The estrogel will be fine, but the problem that causes really the initiation of cancer and stroke on HRT is the artificial progesterone, okay, which are known as progestins. So what I would strongly advise on that is, like my wife's, we've just put her on the estrogel now, and at the moment we get prescribed bioidentical progesterone in pill, but that will run out soon because my doc's gone back to New Zealand. So we can do something on HRT if you want another time, because I've got a shitload of information on that. I can tell you that now.
I do know from a Pink's boutique world, obviously with all the women, and our kind of demographic would tend to be like 35 onwards. We get loads of questions. And obviously the other thing that is linked with HRT is it's when you can have had amazing skin for years and suddenly you go into the menopause and people get all sorts of problems with their skin. So it's a big play. So anyone that would like more fill and HRT, let us know. Penny put up a quick question. And I think this is really interesting, because if you had got hold of Luke, not even 10 years ago, but if you said to him, should I supplement my diet in this current world? Do I need to supplement? He'd have been like, no, eat the right things, you'll be fine. Now I am feeling, and he now feels, that perhaps that is not your answer. Do you see any way, Phil, of having healthy, long life longevity currently living in the UK without supplementing your diet?
There are certain supplements that I would strongly recommend, because first of all, from fetal development to now, whatever age you are, you've been exposed to a plethora of toxicity, okay? So if you asked me that question and we were living in Fiji or something like that, I'd say no.
In our hut.
Yeah, exactly. We're not polluted. The food, is just so full of nutrition. The soil is rich. The fish is not polluted. So yeah. So it all depends where you are. In the UK, 100. So there's certain nutrients that you can take to the bank that I would advise from my research that you take in real optimum doses. Things like vitamin C, for example, is absolutely a must. At least 3,000 milligrams a day. The best time to take vitamin C is on an empty stomach. The only time you take vitamin C with food, if you know your ferritin levels are low, okay? If the iron levels are low, take vitamin C with food. But when you take the food, don't have any carbohydrates with that food. So it would be like some fish and some vegetables. And the reason why you would do that is because carbohydrates will compete with vitamin C at the cell receptor, and it will win every time. Okay, they use the same cell receptor. And in nature, for example, all the other species that produce vitamin C, they make it out of glucose. Okay, we are one of the only species, what is us primates, guinea pigs, and some fucking random hedgehog somewhere that don't make vitamin C. And what's really interesting with the vitamin C is that it is the most powerful antiviral. And the reason why we lost the gene, by the way, for vitamin C production was to allow us to become better at storing fat. So the lower the vitamin C in the person, not only the lower the immune system, but also the greater tendency that the body will store fat. There's other nutrients. Omega-3s will do that as well. When omega-3s are low, the body will store more fat because omega-6s will signal to the body to store fat. And vitamin D is the same. When vitamin D is low, the body will store more fat.
And with the vitamin C, Phil, is it like we would teach in skincare? So in skincare, lots of high-end brands, lots of vitamin C, but technically as soon as vitamin C has gone into water, that ascorbic acid has started to oxidize and it's not worth the writing on the bottle. You need it in powder form that you then activate and pretty much drink instantly.
Well, believe it or not, ascorbic acid from the only man in the world that was awarded the Nobel Prize twice, who was an expert on vitamin C as well, Linus Pauling. As he said, they did all the research on ascorbic acid and they said that is absolutely fine. So ascorbic acid will be used as the body will convert that into vitamin C. So so you'll get a lot of products out there with like fucking rose zips and everything else. It doesn't make an ounce of difference. Ascorbic acid is basically, there's different carriers that you can have. So you can have magnesium ascorbic, for example, which is much less harsh on the stomach. Okay, so that's pretty good to do. You know, and the reason why you multi-dose it throughout the day, it's got about a half-life of about 2 hours. If somebody had COVID, for example, you know, and I have studied immunology for those people watching with Toronto and Harvard University. So, by the way, they don't teach you any of this. It's something I had to really look into depth in this. But what I do know, one of the greatest experts on vitamin C is from Manchester University, and what he's discovered, if you take 3 grams of vitamin C on an empty stomach 4 times a day, you can get your blood levels up to a level where you would if you had intravenous vitamin C, which is what will knock out any virus. And it's, you know, that they've done that for over 80 years.
Can't get it much intravenous vitamin C anymore, can you? It's not easy to get hold of.
No, and you don't need to, because the intravenous, I don't even use that with cancer patients, but the intravenous, you get this huge spike and drop. But with 3 grams of vitamin C first thing in the morning, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and nighttime, you've saturated the body with it. And there's certain immune cells which have got vitamin C pumps in them. They'll pump the vitamin C up. And that's what prevents the cytokine storm. And I mentioned the cytokine storm earlier on. Vitamin C is incredible at reducing that inflammatory response when the immune cells are chasing down the viruses.
Also very good for skin.
Oh, well, actually, why is it good for skin though? Do you know?
No, tell me why.
Okay, because you can't make a molecule of collagen without vitamin C. So there's 2 other nutrients, which is what you're drinking there, is lysine and proline. So vitamin C, lysine, and proline is the nutrients that will make collagen. So collagen is the most abundant protein in the body. It's around 30%. And that's why a lot of women will start to become more degenerative in the skin. They've got a lot of toxins in them, which uses an enormous amount of vitamin C. And as you know, then when they get in past a certain age group, when the estrogen starts to decline as well, that's when the skin will really start to sag. You know, but the beauty of it is once you know all this and you know what your lab work is, you can then get the right dose. That's the thing. It's not a shotgun approach. It's very individual. You know, that's what's so interesting about this field.
So we've got a couple of questions that have come through, but some of them, I don't know whether, say like Paul said, he's got Crohn's disease, what supplements should he take? And he's always had an issue with his weight. Do you want to maybe deal with that separately, or is it something that...
Well, the Crohn's disease, there's not a singular supplement. It's really a lifestyle, okay? So really from a nutritional perspective, what he needs to find out is what his calprotectin levels are, because that gives you the level of inflammation in the bowels, which will indicate is Crohn's disease. The biggest things that I would drop out of his diet, first of all, is red meat, okay? Don't consume any vegetable oils, which are very inflammatory. They're not really vegetable oils, but they call them that because it sounds healthy. It's the things like, canola oil, rapeseed oil, soybean oil, etc. Lots of cruciferous vegetables, because what you've got to do, you've got to know how to feed the microbiome. The microbiome is causing the Crohn's disease, okay? So he's feeding his microbiome the wrong foods. I would also be very proactive on always organic foods if you can. Lots of cruciferous vegetables. So drop the red meat, but also real high-dose fish oil. We know actually fish oil is a huge preventer of colon cancer. It causes massive de-inflammation in the colon, but also never underestimate getting reverse osmosis water filter fitted, because we know that chlorine in the drinking water will also cause a lot of inflammation in the bowel as well as inflammation throughout the body.
Amazing. Perfect. And Phil, Paul, if you've got any more questions to send them over, we can look at those separately. A couple of people asking about fish oil links in terms of like the challenge of like overfishing, the kind of ethics behind fisheries at the moment. I mean, is it a case of kind of trying to look like you would for skincare for someone that is officially badged that they are fishing in the right way? I mean, where? Yeah,
well, the fish that we use come from Scandinavia. We primarily use anchovies and sardines, which are the highest sort of omega-3 fatty acids fish oil. I think it's, none of them is farmed. You know, the farm fish is just, ironically, with farm fish, they have a much higher ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, you know, plus all the antibiotics in there and everything else. And also all the stress from the fish. Because the fish are in such a stressed environment, there's actually a lot of stress hormones, which sounds a bit bizarre, but that's also just something to really think about. You know, so, but also you can get algae oil as well. You know, you don't have to get fish oil. If people are really conscious about the planet, you can get algae oil, which is very high in omega-3 fatty acids. Don't even try flaxseed oil. Flaxseed oil is a complete and utter waste of time in terms of it doesn't convert into EPA and DHA. It's about 0.1%. You know, it's a very little carryover.
So ditch the flaxseed, take the algae.
Yeah, or even better, take high quality fish oil. That, you know, so that's what I would do. You know, I mean, I take about three tablespoons a day.
I mean, from I know from myself, I was very lucky. On my 40th birthday, there were no expensive handbags or trips away, Phil. There was I've bought you a month session with Phil because you need to live longer, lady. That was my husband's present. So proper mid lockdown, we started, didn't we? And we did a month together. And since then, so that was June 2020. And obviously one of the first things Phil's did with me is kind of popped me onto all of this supplementation. So fish oils, vitamin C, vitamin D, magnesium, a probiotic, I think it was glutamine as well. And I have stuck very distinctly with it. And I mean, very surface, but my skin, you can genuinely tell. But the other thing, and I said to Abby just before we came live, we all currently live in a relatively busy world with many chronic stressors for all of us. But the big thing I would say is that I am very, very balanced. Like we at work at the moment, we're in the worst period for a brand of just stress everywhere, bits everywhere. And I feel calm and balanced all the time. I don't notice my periods anymore. I've got I'm not premenstrual in any way. I'm just kind of here. So thank you for that. And I mean, obviously I have been doing it for a long time now. We're kind of a good year in, but is that the kind of thing you would see?
Yeah, well, I mean, the body always wants to be healthy, providing you give it what it needs. And from a sense of balance, what's really interesting, one of the big reasons we have such a mental health epidemic in the UK is because the brain is starving. Okay, in the last 75 years, we've reduced the omega-3 fatty acid intake by 80%. The omega-3 fatty acids, along with cholesterol, believe it or not, are the most important substance for the brain to function. And the brain is also the fattiest organ in the body. So the relevance of that is it's massively susceptible to toxins. Toxins will always gravitate to the brain. So that what we've got is very inflamed brains, and they're very malnourished, and that will always then lead to behavioral issues, whether they're addictions, whether they're aggressive outbursts, whether it's chronic depression, whether it's suicide. With the omega-3 fatty acid index, for example, we can predict with 62% accuracy who's going to commit suicide just looking at that index, because that index is, as I said, the brain is literally screaming for omega-3s, which are no longer in the diet. And the omega-6s, which then cause inflammation in the brain, the higher the omega-6, the far more likely you're also going to get Alzheimer's as well. So the brain is in this constant inflammatory state. And that's why another reason why we see in this massive epidemic of, you know, real mental health issues. And the medical system solution is to throw an antidepressant at it. It's crazy, because 98% of the brain will communicate via hormones. Only 2% will communicate via neurotransmitters. There's over 180 neurotransmitters in the brain. The medical system will only focus on one of those, which is serotonin. But you can have chronic depression because you've got such low omega-3 fatty acids. Estrogen, for example, when you've got low estrogen levels, you can't even use the serotonin in the brain. If you've got a thyroid disorder, which is quite common today, especially in females, there's more thyroid receptors in the brain than anywhere in the body. You will have the worst depression you can imagine, and no antidepressant will have any effect. And that's why I look at the bloods. When you get those bloods, when you know what's wrong, it's a bit like taking your car in for an MOT and service. You've got to look under the hood, and each car will need a different body part, or there's something else wrong with it. In 7 years of looking at blood work, I honestly haven't seen a similar profile. It's so individual.
There's a few other people saying need a Phil for Christmas.
Yeah, I totally agree. Someone did ask, can you overdo supplements, Phil?
The only supplement, it's very difficult to overdo supplements. Vitamin D in massive doses can cause issues, and I'm talking like 100,000 IUs a day. Vitamin C, the only side effect of vitamin C on overdose is loose bowels, and that's a good indicator just to back off the dose. And you'll find, ironically, with vitamin C, for example, if you're really sick, you can take up to 12,000 milligrams a day, and you will have no loose bowels, because the immune system is literally, as I said, they've got pumps in them. They're literally sucking up the vitamin C. If the immune system is fine, then if you took 12,000 milligrams a day, then you're gonna spend a lot of the time on the toilet. But it's not going to cause any harm either. The main ones that will cause harm is if you would have to take massive doses of the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, K2. Okay, and it's impossible to do that. You would have to be deliberately overloading the system. So vitamin D, for example, the optimum dose, depending on your levels, most people in the UK are around 20 to 30 nanograms, which is very low. They would need at least 8 to 10,000 IUs a day, along with about 1,000 milligrams of magnesium and about 200 micrograms of K2. And also something really interesting as well is boron. I think I mentioned that to you the other day. What we know with boron, actually, it really helps to absorb magnesium and vitamin D and strengthen the bones. And also, as a side note, it increases free testosterone as well, quite significantly in male and female.
There was one more thing before. Sorry,
you go. Absolutely, you go.
I really want to touch on this subject. So Phil mentions in his calls how research has proven that people that are angry and hostile can die earlier and suffer from cardiovascular issues. Phil, can we touch on that? Because I just think this is so important, because it comes back to perspective again, how you perceive life, the way you are communicating and receiving life. It's so interesting.
Well, first of all, perception will determine how the cells respond. Okay, so there's a number of other things that will do that, but how we view things, for example, the guy who wrote The Biology of Belief, a guy called Bruce Lipton, who was one of the first stem cell scientists back in the late 60s, what he discovered was when you have a stem cell can become any cell in the body, okay? So what they did, he spent 7 days incubating stem cells, where eventually had 30,000 stem cells after 7 days. And then he had 3 Petri dishes. And what he did was, he put 10,000 stem cells in one, in another, in the other. And he just changed the environment in each Petri dish, the actual solution, which is very similar to blood. And what he discovered, as he changed the solution, one Petri dish developed muscle cells, one developed fat cells, and one developed bone cells, okay? And as he said, the environment will change it. Now, what he's gone on to understand, as well as other great scientists, is that what can change that the Petri dish analogy is actually how we view the world, okay? And I always use the analogy then of like when you fall in love with someone, in the early days, and you're walking on water and you feel amazing. You haven't swallowed a pill. You've created that chemistry. So now your Petri dish, right, is full of cells which are like growing, they're healing, they're repairing, they're absolutely on it, because they are listening to every emotion and looking at the imperception. And then on the flip side, if you have an argument, then a couple of months later, you create the opposite chemical cascade, okay? Again, you haven't swallowed a pill. Now those cells are now going into protection mode. They're going into fight or flight mode. And the longer, as I said, they stay there, the more likely you're going to become diseased. And we also know that, which is quite interesting from the anger perspective, there's, in lesson 15 of my course, which is about 5.5 hours, all on emotions and thoughts, You know, there's tons of studies on, you know, one of my favorites, I think it was from Harvard University. They followed medical doctors for their whole career. And so right from, you know, the university days right away through, and what they found was angry medical students, was 7 times more likely to be dead by the time they were 50 because of heart attacks. And the reason why, again, it's really high levels of stress hormones as well. You know, the body is just, and the problem with that is then the body will go, again, it will shut down everything I keep speaking about, the reproduction system, the immune system, but it'll also then starts causing like constriction of the heart, etc. So never underestimate, stress will drive every single disease. You can be on organic diet, you can be drinking clean filtered water, you can be living on a Fiji island, right? But if you take your emotional baggage with you and you keep creating the same thoughts in your head from previous experiences, which were, you know, deleterious for health, you create the same environment for disease. You can't outrun it, you know, and that's why it's the last habit in the course, you know, it's the last lesson, because if you don't get that right, then the other 14 lessons before were a waste of time. And so, I mean, even when they look at married couples, for example, they look at hostile couples, they heal 60% slower than couples who are in loving relationships. And they look then at the blood work and they see much more like healing sort of immune cells, etc., in the loving couple compared to the unloving couple. You know, so there literally are thousands of studies, and there was a book written about 2 years ago. She was a very cynical doctor, and her dad was a doctor as well, who hated any of this, emotional stuff. But she read through 3,500 case studies on people who had a complete remission from a disease. And her conclusion at the end of that was, her name is Dr. Lisa Radcliffe, I believe it is. I forget the name of the book, but I do quote her in the course. Basically, she's not quite right, but you can emotionally overcome any disease, but unfortunately that's a bit too excitable. But there's no doubt what she is right on is that the emotions in a lot of people are as damaging as the toxic food we consume, in the toxic water. If you don't get everything as good as you possibly can, then you will never have optimum health. That's pretty much it.
Perfect. That is like the sentence at the end.
Yeah.
Phil, there's lots of questions come up, but I will ask you and I can feedback. Quite a few people were asking about supplements and levels, but we'll have the recording for this as well, so I can send that out to everyone. I know for those of you that have just met Phil for the first time, you probably feel like Abby and I do, which is like, wow, this man just blows my brain when he appears on a screen or in front of me. But it would be good, Phil, for people to know where to find you. So your Instagram is...
Oh, fuck. I think it's Instagram.
It's Phil Richards. I'm also Phil's PA now. It's Phil Richards Nutrition on Instagram.
Awesome.
I post more on Facebook, okay? If you go on Facebook and you'll find Phil Richards P, that's what I post about 5-6 times a day. And my website is Phil Richards Nutrition Lab. Yeah, that's
awesome. And if anyone does, like Kirstie for Christmas, want to have a look at the blood side, then that is where the kind of the carb bonnet is coming up for really looking under the hood. In terms of, Mark's just said, how and where can we get the blood work done, Phil?
So how that works, there's 2 panels. In fact, there's 3 panels on my site, okay, along with the stool panel. There's the ultimate male panel and the ultimate female panel, which are like the Rolls Royce of blood testing. If you're on a budget, don't worry about it. There's a fundamental panel, which is, a fraction of the price, but it is exceptionally thorough. It looks at 80 markers. I look at all the hormones. I look at liver, kidney function, cardiovascular health, even thyroid antibodies as well. That's $299 plus consultation fee. So you can click on, you can have a good look at there. And the way it works is that when you book the blood test, they'll send you out the lab kit and you will arrange for a phlebotomist in your area. There is a list of phlebotomists on the site as well for your area. You can see all that on the site. You'll pay the consultation fee. when that comes through to me, I send you then a number of online questionnaires, which are very thorough, to fill in whilst we're waiting for the blood work to come in, which normally takes about 10 days. When that comes in, then the first consultation we do is all on your blood results, okay? You know, and I go through it in great depth. And then the second consultation, and I go through your nutrition and your supplementation program, and I explain why you're going to take this product because of your blood markers on this side. And any advice you need also on training, I can quite happily accommodate that side of it as well.
Might you make them do coffee enemas like I had to, or was that just special treatment for me?
That was just you, unfortunately.
I was happy 40th.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've actually had a couple who were on coffee enemas last year, and they've taken them for the full year, and I've just redone their bloods, and you just can't believe how much their liver has healed. It's just incredible. So they don't need to take that anymore. You know, it all depends. When there's certain markers on the liver where if they're elevated, the coffee enema is nothing about bowel health. As I said, it's really a liver stimulator. And when I mentioned GGT, the gamma glutamyl transferase, coffee enemas have been shown to increase that marker by over 4,000. Increase glutathione by over 4,000%, you know, in clinical trials. And they were used in the medical field all the way up until the 70s. You know, it was a huge part of the medical training. And apparently the only reason they stopped using them is because every year they have a new medical dictionary and they just run out of space, you know, where more and more drugs are coming in and they shift more and more of the alternative stuff out.
Awesome.
Nice one, Phil.
And yeah, anyone watching, if you need and want more Phil in your life, then ask us. I reckon we could have a proverb Phil concept.
Well, I wonder if we could get Phil back on if we ask really nicely at the end of the 8 weeks, so we can show him our svelte physiques, even get the words out. Because this is where on A Life Less Inflammatory we really start kicking in. Me and Kirstie are going to be following a specific diet that Phil offered to Kirstie, so we're going to be bringing that in, and it starts.
Well, from tomorrow, basically. So basically, Phil, what Abby and I did 2 weeks ago, we started essentially on Abby's platform, which is, how would anyone get there, Abby? Can we put the link into Project Woman? We started and we did a week, which was inflammatory from an environmental perspective, a week which is inflammatory from a toxic load perspective, which obviously is my bag in terms of skincare, laundry products, household, and essentially that's all free content, including coming up to you. And then from this week we start, spurred by Phil, into the malnutrition part, so the supplementation, which obviously we've spent most of the hour on, and the malnutrition. And what Abby and I essentially were going to do is exactly what Phil did with me when I was 40, the diet he took and said, right, this is your kind of anti-inflammatory diet. So we're going to be from tomorrow kind of starting that again and kind of measuring the impact. And anyone that wants to join and go through that is free to join us. From that bit, we did say this is where there is a really small charge to get into it of £30, and solely because, and this I learned from Phil, the brutal truth, only because this is where it becomes hard. Everything till now is listening and learning, but this bit is actually doing. It's actually being willing to stop eating sugar, willing to stop eating gluten, and really we want people there that are actually going to do it. As Phil gets to, I've seen Phil do some seminars where he stands up and he's like, just fuck off if you're not going to do it.
So we offer a lot in there. So on there as well, you've got guided stuff from me, such as the Wim Hof breath. There's some really beautiful techniques to help with the emotional side of stuff. And after discussing about the angry side of things and your perspective, I'm going to be offering free meditation to help with any anger first thing in the morning, starting from next week. So there is a load of support there for you. But any questions, I've popped the link into the chat. You do actually still get a little bit of time free on this. Okay. So why not? You know, Kirstie and I started this because we needed some inspiration. You know, we've been in lockdown, we're getting really demotivated, and we need a good crew of people around us. And if you're one of those people, join us. You've got nothing to lose and so much to gain. Like, be autonomous in your health choices. Take control. Be the CEO of your health. #.
Mr. Richards, man who literally, so when he came to Quinn's and he started literally shouting at the Quinn's boys in the early 2000s that they were poisoning themselves with their deodorants, with their body washes. He literally sent me scurrying back to my beauty schools, pulling through cupboards, going through all my spa bottles. And I was like, oh my God, what is all of this stuff? Literally the last 17 years of my life of Pink's Boutique and Proverb have been because of you. So thank you so much for that, but also for sharing your immense knowledge with us tonight.
Well,
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, guys. Have a good evening, and hopefully we'll catch up again.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Brilliant.
Pete.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone. Thanks for joining, everyone.